Hello and welcome into Fantasy Focus Football. My name is Daniel Dopp, and we have a huge show planned for us today. I look around this beautiful studio we just got in. You guys know we just moved into a new studio this year, and I got to be honest, I feel kind of lonely in here because I am all alone inside this studio. You know why? Because today is Loza Day. That is right, Liz Loza joining us for the entire show, diving into all of your breakdowns, Liz, and the DrumBeat players that you have been focusing on so far this offseason, guys that you continue to be able to love. I am so pumped to be able to have you, Liz, because we have not had you on Fantasy Focus yet this year. How are you doing? It is great to see your face.
I am wonderful. It is wonderful to see yours. I'm excited that we're going to be in person very, very soon. And I can't wait to dig in. I know you sent me a couple of players. We're in agreement on most of them, but I think we should have some fun-loving debates on a couple and really serve up this. And it's so great to be back with this audience. I love this crew. Thank you always, listeners, for tweeting at me nice things, sliding into my DMs appropriately. You guys are very classy. We like that.
Yeah. We're nice to you because we're mean to Mike. We're not going to be mean to you, obviously, on this show. We don't like Mike Clay, but we love Liz Loza. All right, and you mentioned it. Liz, we're going to be in person soon. You know where? Boston, Connecticut at Banners. Live show. That is right. August 15th at Banners Kitchen and Tap in Boston. 5 p.m. doors. 6 p.m. is the show. Me, Field, Liz, Stefania, Mike Clay, all 5 of us in attendance, and we're going to stay after and watch the Patriots and Eagles game with you guys. Preseason is going to be a ton of fun. Liz, I don't think you've ever done a live Fantasy Focus show. This is your first one, correct?
It is. My first question, are adult beverages allowed or not until after the show or not at all?
Are you speaking for us or for people in the audience? Because people in the audience can have as many adult beverages as they want. I think maybe you and I might be able to have 1 or 2, but we've got to wait most of the time until we get to the tailgating part, I think.
I was mostly asking for Field.
Oh, yeah, that's fair. That's fair. All right. Go check that out, fantasyfocuslive.com if you want to get tickets for that. Like I said, August 15th, it's going to be a ton of fun hanging out with all 5 of us. All right, Liz, let's dive into it. We've got your breakouts and your DrumBeat players today. Let's start with the breakouts that you have for 2024. You brought a bunch of names to the table. Why don't you go ahead and set us up with your first player?
I mean, I say this with love as a Bears fan, but I am thrilled for Commanders fans because I think their rookie quarterback is going to be the most productive player at the position in his first year. I'm in love with Jayden Daniels. I don't know how you're not in love with this dual threat skill set, huge arm, elite rushing traits. Now, just a couple of quick stats. He led the FBS in both yards per pass and yards per rush. He's going to bring that main character energy to Washington, and he is surrounded by capable playmakers. Terry McLaurin is a star. I've said this on a previous show. Jahan Dotson should be. Austin Eckler remains, regardless of whether or not people think he's washed. Oh, by the way, also a co-starter with Brian Robinson on the current depth chart. So, a little love for my guy. Anyway, he remains one of the best pass-catching backs in the league. And I think that the latest McCaffrey prospect can bring some obvious bloodlines and yak ability as a slot complement. I love Daniels here. Cliff Kingsbury's offense, by the way, a great fit for him as his playing style is not dissimilar to Kyler Murray. So there's some workability, flexibility, understanding there between the OC and the new QB. I have him as a high ceiling QB too. And I have been, as you know, in our mocks, taking him every opportunity once we hit those double-digit rounds.
Yeah. When you do that as a QB2, Liz, have you taken him as your only QB, or is he a guy that you're grabbing as a high-upside second quarterback in case there's an injury, or just as trade bait for potentially later on in the season?
I don't really play the trade bait game. That's a little too forward thinking for me. Moment to moment, fly by the seat of my pants is kind of how I like to live in fantasy. Okay. But I do like adding him as a stash because the quarterbacks that I am targeting might have a couple of durability issues. We'll get to those guys later, at least one of them later.
Well, it's crazy when you look at it. I mean, right now, when you look at the screen, we just had up on the screen there a full screen talking about his projections. Mike Clay has him ranked with the second highest rushing total of all quarterbacks as a rookie only behind a guy named Lamar Jackson. That is ahead of Kyler Murray. That's ahead of Jalen Hurts. That's ahead of Josh Allen. Those are some superstars, Liz Loza. And there's one thing that we say every single time on this show when we're talking about rushing quarterbacks. It's a cheat code. You can be the best passer in the NFL, and we saw how good C.J. Stroud was last year as a passer, and still did not finish inside the top 5 at the position because of that. Utilizing your legs is a massive cheat code in fantasy. He had over 700 rushing yards each of his final 3 seasons in college, including 1,100 rushing yards and 10 touchdowns his final season. That same season, he also threw for 40 touchdowns and only 4 interceptions. So all the things that you led with, Liz, there's a lot to be excited about if you are a Commanders fan, or if you are somebody that grabs Jayden Daniels as a potential quarterback in fantasy football, given all of the skill set that he brings to the table. I love this option. I love this call. I think Jayden Daniels is a breakout, and I'm with you on this one.
All right. I love that we are in lockstep.
All right. We got another player that we're moving on to. We got a bunch of them here. I think we have 10 players for our breakout. So second breakout, we're going to move to the running back position. Where are we going?
We're going to go to Pittsburgh because this player heading...
Hold on.
Oh.
We're going to go to Pittsburgh where Arthur Smith is the current coordinator. You have a breakout for a guy where Arthur Smith is the current offensive coordinator?
Well, we're talking about a running back.
Okay, all right. Oh, all right. Well, that makes me feel a little bit better. All right, give it to me.
All right. We are talking about a running back, and this player was someone who was but a whisper heading into last season. Najee Harris was obviously supposed to be the primary ball carrier, and he was-ish until about a little after the bye. But from weeks 9 to 18, Jaylen Warren exploded. I think that's a perfect way, frankly, to describe his skill set, too. He exploded onto the scene and through the field. Weeks 9 through 18, he averaged 14 touches per game and 13 fantasy points, PPR, per game. He closed out the year as Fantasy's RB22 overall. Najee Harris, by the way, closed out the year as Fantasy's RB23 overall. Warren was prioritized on passing downs. In fact, he was the RB3 in team target share at over 27%. He was the more explosive, here we go again, rusher, finishing as the RB5 in evaded tackles. And this should be a shock to absolutely no one. He was the more efficient option to Harris, recording 5.5 yards per touch, RB7 for that. So now we've got, as you mentioned, Arthur Smith coming to town. We know that man loves to run the ball. We also know that he likes to spread the wealth. Now, Najee Harris has a knack for absorbing contact, rather. We are dishing out content. Harris absorbs contact. So he's definitely going to be in play, particularly in real life. But I think that Warren has the better fantasy profile because of his ability as a pass catcher and because of his efficiency. He is currently the 26th running back coming off the board. And I feel like he's going to at least do as well as he did last year, if not better. So what a great value, also considering the obvious upgrade in quarterback. I mean, give me Wilson or Fields over Pickett.
Yeah, I like the idea, and you mentioned it, obviously, being able to have him as a pass catcher in this backfield. He had at least 4 receptions in 9 of his different games and at least 10 fantasy points, which is a nice floor. 10 fantasy points in 10 of his 17 games. So even though it's kind of a running back by committee, given the fact that you've got 2 guys there, that floor is really nice because of that pass-catching upside that he has. He's not a touchdown-dependent guy that you've got to wait to get in the end zone. So ideally, though, you mentioned a lot of positive rushing stats for him as well. Hopefully he can continue to unlock that in this Arthur Smith offense, which would be really fantastic. The question for me, Liz, are you drafting him as your RB2 if you go with a hero RB build, or is he a guy that you view more as an RB3 that's just a lot of upside for your running back room?
I mean, ideally, I would like to have him as an RB3, but that really depends where in the snake I'm picking.
Sure.
Because, I mean, if you're, picking in the top 4 and you can grab Bijan or Breece Hall, then, your build is going to look a little bit different. I mean, just as an aside, I'm taking Isaiah Pacheco anywhere I can as an RB2 if I'm picking earlier, as an RB1 if I'm later in the draft order.
I love it. Jaylen Warren this year is one of those guys that I feel like there are a bunch of different thoughts on, not because of him necessarily, but because of Arthur Smith in that offense, because he's also splitting time with Najee Harris. So many rankers have them feeling like they are back-to-back, trying to decide which one is the one that you want in this offense. I like the call on Jaylen Warren, and I am with you as a pass catcher. I want to see him as a third-year running back get unlocked even more this year. All right.
Can we just say about Arthur Smith really quickly? Because I hear this, and obviously his time as a head coach did not go as brilliantly as anyone, frankly, planned. But sometimes, and we've seen this time and time again, there's a coach who's really good at being an offensive or a defensive coach, but can't kind of handle the multitasking necessary to be a head coach. And I think Arthur Smith might be one of those guys. So I don't want to ding him for all of the time he spent in Atlanta. Certainly as a head coach, it deserves to be dinged, but we do know that he's a decent offensive mind. And so I think when he has less on his plate, he might be able to better focus and execute.
Hey, I would take that. All of us in fantasy football would take that, Liz. Let's hope that happens. I'm actually going to stick in Pittsburgh. In spite of the fact that I just came at you for picking a player in an Arthur Smith offense, I've got a breakout in George Pickens. And I understand all the reasons why I should be nervous about this, given what I just saw with Drake London under Arthur Smith. But George Pickens had 4 games of 125 or more receiving yards. He had 5 games with at least 15 fantasy points when he was the number 2 wide receiver, behind Deontay Johnson in this offense. Almost a 22% target share as the number 2 wide receiver in this offense last year. Now he's the unquestioned number 1, and you mentioned it earlier. There's not going to be Kenny Pickett under center. It's either going to be Justin Fields or Russell Wilson. I don't know if you know what DJ Moore looked like last year with Justin Fields under center, that big play ability. But George Pickens is the kind of guy that could win you a week given that massive upside. And with Justin Fields potentially under center, I'm getting a few shades of DJ Moore big play games. Not full season, but I could see some of that transpire. So for me, I am in on George Pickens. The one thing that needs to happen, he needs more consistent volume. Only 6.2 targets per game. That has got to go up. We got to see at least 8 targets per game if you're going to be the wide receiver 1 in this offense and a guy that's going to be able to break out and be a top 30, maybe even top 25 wide receiver in fantasy. But I do like George Pickens given the situation.
So my issue with Pickens is not just consistent volume, but consistency on the field. I mean, this might be an unpopular take, but sure, he's got all of these incredible circus catches. Also, run a route, you won't need to reach that high. I don't like.
Okay, that's
add
fair.
some precision, maybe polish it up a little bit. Like, this is a guy who, if you want to talk about flying by the seat of your pants, it looks like every play sort of like, all right, let's impro. Well, Ben Roethlisberger is no more in Pittsburgh. The impro king is gone. It's time for George Pickens to polish and get himself right. And so I'm just a little bit worried about what you said. Yes, he can have a big play week and win you 1 week and then lose you three more. So my issue is just sort of like the player and the maturity of his skill set, not his person.
Sure.
Please don't
Yep.
think that I'm taking this as a personal attack. So that's what worries me about him. And when we add that to the Arthur Smith of it all, I am a little bit concerned. But you are right. There is an upgrade in quarterback. And so the comp to Drake London in Atlanta is not exactly the same.
Let's say that George Pickens does, though, make that leap, right? He does get things together and he feels like, all right, man, he became the wide receiver 1, unquestioned, of this offense, not just because he is the guy, but because you see it on the field. He became that player. Mm-hmm. I think that George Pickens in this situation it has the ability, like I said, to be able to win you a week. But I'm hoping that what you said after that, but then lose you 3 weeks, like that was last year. It felt like that boom-bust player was George Pickens last year. We need to see more consistency this year. I am hoping it helps that Deontay Johnson is out of town. So we'll see how that works. But, Liz, I say we move forward and talk about him. Deontay Johnson no longer in town, and he's a player that you have as a breakout as well, moving to a Bryce Young-led offense. Why do you like Deontay?
I mean, so to be fair, he's obviously not a breakout candidate, but it has been a minute since he produced, 2 years, in fact, since he had his only 1,000-yard plus season of his 5-year career. I think that the change in scenery from Pittsburgh to Charlotte is offering him a chance at redemption. If we want to talk about last year, you're totally right. George Pickens was the star. And I think that's partially because at least, that Deontay Johnson was horribly misused in Matt Canada's offense, right? Deontay Johnson, because Pickens was such a force on the outside, fell from that X position and got pushed into the slot more regularly. In fact, he recorded the highest slot rate of his entire career at over 20%. That is not where Deontay shines. Now in Carolina, he's going back to the X, right? If you look at the depth chart, you've got Deontay Johnson as the X. You've got either Jonathan Mingo or Xavier Legette. A little bit of a battle there, depending on who wins it, and if Legette gets healthy on opposite him. And then you got our old boy Adam Thielen working the middle, working that slot place. I think that is very good for Johnson because it is. And you know, this reminds me. My mom's not going to like this, but this reminds me of something that one of her old boyfriends used to say. This man was an utter disaster in every way, but he did have this nugget, and that was, when in doubt, just kiss. Keep it simple, stupid. And I feel like Johnson is a player who is incredibly talented, one of the best separators in the game, still. Yep. And yet has a proclivity towards making maddening mistakes. If we simplify this offense, then Johnson can do what he does best. Now, I know there's questions about Bryce Young, but I am buying in to this David Canales QB whisperer narrative. I saw what he did with Geno Smith, did it again with Baker Mayfield. Yep. I think he too understands the KISS theory and is bringing it to Carolina. Even if Johnson, I'm not expecting like him to return to 2021 form, but I do think that he and Young will connect enough times in order for him to absolutely smash his 13th round ADP.
Holy smokes, that is late. You're telling me you're basically getting the number one starting wide receiver for an offense in the 13th round, and you're getting that value because of the fact that it's a Bryce Young-led offense. And I know you said that you want to be more in on this, the Dave Canales situation. I totally am with you. Mike Clay has been talking up Bryce Young in spite of how much Field does not want to hear it, and we are going back and forth about it. But yeah, this second-year leap for rookie quarterbacks, you at least have to give the opportunity there to be able to see what he can do. When you have, when you look at Deontay Johnson, if he's coming off the board in the 13th round, where do you have him ranked amongst your wide receivers? Do you have that in front of you?
I think I don't have it in front of me, but I believe I have him somewhere as a low-end RB2 in that RB 20 to 20. I'm sorry, yes, as a wide receiver 2 in the 20 to 23 range.
Okay, got it. I have him a little bit lower than that. I see him in the late 20s, maybe early 30s, only because of the fact that there's so many wide receivers. That's not like a anti-Deontay Johnson thing. So that is there's just so many wide receivers in the NFL that it's tough to be able to say, I'm going to move him too high up there. But 13th round, Liz, the value of what he can be in this offense, that's just too low for him in fantasy drafts right now.
I agree. And also our producer Tyler, just came into my ear and told me I have him as wide receiver 32.
So, okay. So you see him similarly to me. Okay.
Yes.
Love that. All right.
But I do have him projected as high. Like, I do think he could post top 20 numbers, which is why
absolutely.
I said that.
I'm with you. All right. Let's move ahead. Talk about a Titans running back. Again, another running back by committee. You're taking a stance on one of these players. Which one are you taking a stance on?
I mean, Tennessee fans might disagree with me on this, but last year there were some bright spots in Nashville, and by spots I mean one, and his name was Tajay Spears.
Yep.
So he recorded a top 5 juke rate, evaded 40 tackles on just 152 touches. He thrived in space, registered 8.3 yards per rush outside the tackles. That's important. That was RB2 for that stat category, by the way. And he also flashed as a receiver. He converted 52 of 70 looks, RB9 in both of those categories, targets and catches. I like the skill set here. Now, we know that the Titans are retooling their entire offense, but Spears seems to be a key moving forward. They only added Tony Pollard in the offseason, did not draft a running back. Forgive me if after 2023, I am not buying into Tony Pollard's ability to be a primary ball carrier. Plus, if you're looking at all of the coach speak and sound bites and reports out of practices and camp, all of the coaches from Brian Callahan to Nick Holtz to Randy Jordan, have praised both of these backs, right? They're not really showing their cards, but they've noted that both of these are excellent pass catchers, and they have called them interchangeable, which allows them obvious flexibility in their game planning. So I do think this is going to be a 50-50 timeshare. Why not then give me the younger option that's going around later?
Yeah. I think when you look at the two of them, I'm with you. Because they're coming off the board back to back, I'd rather have the second guy. And honestly, I've got Tyjae Spears ranked ahead of Tony Pollard. I have Tyjae Spears even a little bit ahead of where you have him. So I am all in on this pick because I love the decision to be able to feature him in this offense. What I want to see happen is Tony Pollard go back to being the running back that he was in Dallas. Let's find him with some efficiency. Let's find ways to be able to not just run him straight up the middle through the tackles where he wasn't the guy that you saw in Dallas the year before being super efficient for fantasy managers. That gave us so much excitement. With these two guys, I would rather have Tyjae Spears, the younger guy, the guy that I feel like is just as explosive. And by the way, last year, his best game, Liz Loza, highlighting how explosive he can be, his best game, 21.6 fantasy points. Came on only 6 touches. Like, this is one of the things that he can do with his pass catching ability, with his ability to be able, you talked about his elusiveness and how good he is in the open field like that. I love Tyjae Spears, have him as a top 25 running back. So I am also taking a stance. If I'm taking one of these Titans running backs, it's going to be Tyjae over Tony Pollard. All right. Anything else you want to say on Tyjae Spears before I talk about Zamir White and we probably get into an argument?
I have nothing. Let's move ahead.
All right. So let's talk about Zamir White, Liz. I think this was the one player that you really pushed back on last night, if I am not mistaken, that I added final 4 weeks of the season. I want to look at Zamir White, okay? Josh Jacobs had a quad injury. He basically has been a backup to Josh Jacobs his entire career up until those final 4 games of last year. Over the final 4 weeks, when he was the unquestioned starter, he was 8th in touches and yards from scrimmage. He was the only guy getting the work. He was running back 11 over that span. Over the final 4 weeks, he was running back 11. Showed you what he can do when he can be the guy that gets the opportunity in this offense. I understand that the Raiders brought in Alexander Mattison. He didn't, unfortunately, do as much as we had hoped he would do when he had the lead role in Minnesota last year, so that doesn't give me a whole lot of pause. The biggest thing for me is anecdotally, talking about this offense, Liz, I don't expect them to be the best offense in the NFL or anywhere even close to that. But I do think this is a situation, if you're a Raiders team that wants to be able to win football games, you're going to have to rely on your running game and rely on that top 10 defense that you have. I don't see them letting Aiden O'Connell or Gardner Minshew decide they're going to be the player that propels them into like these winning stratospheres. I just don't think that their quarterback right now is in that situation. So shorten games, running situations, letting the defense do things, all that to me anecdotally feels like Zamir White is a guy, if you wanted a hero RB2, you grab another guy early and you're looking for that guy that has upside and more opportunities available to him in 2024 than he had in 2023. I like him as a hero RB2 option if that's the kind of build you want to go with. So I'm in on Zamir White as a guy that you can grab a little bit later, and I still think he's got a lot of upside, in spite of the fact that this offense isn't going to be as good as I would hope that it would be. But Liz, I'll lay out. Tell me why I'm wrong.
You mentioned, so I'm conflicted about White because I agree with you. He was wonderful down the stretch. And my issue is less with the player than the circumstances. But you're talking about a team that has a projected win total of 6
for
low. Mike Clay. So we know that Antonio Pierce and Luke Getsy want to run the ball. Sure. How are they going to do that when they losing all the time? If he checked out as a bona fide pass catcher, I'd feel better about this. But he did not play very many third downs last year. And I'm not really worried about Alexander Mattison, but they've also got like Amir Abdullah kicking around, and they drafted that 6th round rookie out of New Hampshire, Dylan Laub, I believe his name, right? Like, and that kid, by the way, has been turning heads in camp. Getsky keeps talking him up. So now we're talking about potentially a 2-down running back on a team that's always playing from behind. So he's getting pulled off the field in 3rd down situations. And I just don't feel good about him being an automatic RB2 because I'm not convinced that his usage or efficiency, you mentioned the quarterback situation, how many stacked boxes is this kid going to face? A wild amount.
bunch.
So,
Yeah.
right, maybe the first month of the season. Sure. And then I think we might have a little bit of a Dameon Pierce 2022 situation where, he gets tired and you can't blame him and the efficiency starts to wane. And I just don't know if he ROIs where he's going to end up going by the end of August.
So right now, currently running back 23 in ESPN consensus. I have him as running back 20. You're a little bit lower than me at running back 24. Part of this is the situation. He's the starting running back, and I don't think that there is a competition for him being the starting running back of this team.
Sure.
But I don't disagree with any of the things that you said, and they're part of the things that I worry about. Anecdotally, if this offense isn't going to be good, it's going to limit his opportunities. Part of that, though, is why I have him as an RB2, and maybe I'm a little high. Maybe I'm a little optimistic on the situation, but that's why he's an RB2 and not a guy that's like top 15, given the fact that he's been given the keys to this new role in Las Vegas. Because if that had been the situation, it would have been a totally different ranking if he had been in a different offense, given what he is right now for the Raiders. So,
listen, Daniel, if you're going to bet on any player, it's one that lives in Vegas. So I don't hate it.
Why not? Why not, right? I love that. All right, let's move ahead. We got two more breakouts we're going to talk about, Liz. Rashid Shaheed. I'll tell you what, outside of Chris Olave in that receiving core, there are not a lot of options, so Rashid Shaheed should have some ability here. Why do you like him this year?
So that, I think, is the simplified, that's the answer, right?
Sure.
He's the number 2 wide receiver, and he's gotten a promotion. But what I like when you look at his numbers last year, so 2 years ago, he flashed down the stretch, right, as a rookie. And we all knew that he wouldn't be able to keep up that efficiency. But there was some optimism. And then last year, he was largely the team's deep threat, so his lines were really boom or bust. But after Michael Thomas was sidelined, Shaheed's overall targets, yes, increased. That's expected. But the varieties of his opportunity also changed. He wasn't just being used as the team's deep threat. So heading into this year, I expect that he's going to be more integrated into the offense. And the team gets a new offensive coordinator in Clint Kubiak of Nepo Baby fame, both because of his father and because he's coming from a Shanahan coaching tree. And he was just working in San Francisco. So I like that design for him, right? That's an offense that's going to utilize a lot of Shaheed's traits, and I think better than they were utilized last year. And so despite all of these things, he's still being drafted outside of the top 50 players at the position, and that to me looks like an incredible opportunity to attack potential value and upside.
Yeah, I love this call, and I'm with you on this. When I look at current ESPN ADP, and this is going to change a lot as we get deeper into August and closer into September, so take it with a grain of salt. Right now, Rashid Shaheed, wide receiver, 55, coming off the board in the 16th round. That's the last round of ESPN fantasy drafts. So he's basically free, Liz. What's the reason to not take a shot on him with your second to last pick? I mean, when you're looking at upside in situations, and if anything, let's hope this doesn't happen to Chris Olave, he'd immediately step in to be the number 1 wide receiver in an offense. Isn't that worth at least investing in with one of your final picks in a fantasy draft? Seems like it to me. I think so. Seems like it to me. So I'm with you on that one. I'm with you on Rashid Shaheed. All right, we got one more we're going to talk about. Dalton Kincaid. I wanted to see him break out last year. It felt like we started to see it, but it never fully materialized. So I want you to speak it into existence for this year, because I'm with you on Dalton Kincaid.
Well, you talked about last year, right? And obviously Dawson Knox was a bit of a question mark and an obstacle to Kincaid. But we all knew that the team drafted Kincaid to be the flex option and the preferred pass catching option. He averaged over 6 catches, 56 yards, and 13 fantasy points per game when Dawson Knox was sidelined from weeks 8 to 12. His targets, of course, dropped slightly after Knox returned, but here's a silver lining and some data worth mining. His routes run, 26, remained the same. Meanwhile, Knox's routes run after he returned decreased. Also, after Joe Brady took over for Ken Dorsey, Kincaid's air yards per target went up. So that means that while Kincaid's overall targets went down with Knox back and Joe Brady holding the clipboard, the value of his targets increased. I think that is something we're going to see more of going forward with Joe Brady now installed as the OC and giving him an entire, as well as Kincaid, an entire offseason. Not to mention the fact that 240, bearing the lead here, targets were vacated by the disappearance, the exits of Stephon Diggs and Gabriel Davis. So now there's a ton of looks available. And obviously there is chemistry and rapport between Josh Allen and Kincaid in a depth and like a pass catching options that are like, frankly, pretty unknown to Allen.
Yeah. I don't know if you just saw the comments that Josh Allen made about Stephon Diggs when he asked if he missed him in the offense.
Yeah.
But I think he's excited to have Dalton Kincaid. So that's what we're going to stick with is I think knowing that, like you had said, 240 targets vacate there, he's looking for a guy that he's excited to throw the football to. I understand there's a new shiny rookie in Keon Coleman. And I get Curtis Samuel and Khalil Shakir. Well, probably, I think we're going to talk about Shakir a little bit later on in the show.
Yep.
But it feels like Dalton Kincaid. If I said to you, Liz Loza, Dalton Kincaid is going to lead pass catchers in fantasy points, all Buffalo Bills pass catchers in fantasy points at the end of the season, do you think that that's a crazy statement?
No, I'm buying 100%. I don't even have to bat an eye. Yes.
Yes. And I'm with you on that. So Dalton Kincaid, if you want to wait a little bit at the tight end position, you don't need to grab a Sam Laporta or a Travis Kelce as the 1-2 guy off the very top in the early rounds. You can wait a little bit and get some nice value with some of these later tight ends, and Dalton Kincaid is one of those tight ends. I'm with you on a potential breakout here.
Dalton Kincaid is going in the 5th round. I think he's going somewhere between George Kittle and Evan Ingram, but I think he has the potential to be a top 3 producer at the position. So you don't have to draft him at peak value like you do those other Travis Kelce, Sam Laporta-esque, Mark Andrews-esque tight ends.
Travis Kelce, Sam Laporta coming off the board in the 3rd round. Right now, Dalton Kincaid coming off the board in the 7th. You get 4 extra rounds of value. Okay. So that's even better. Wow. He is sandwiched in between Evan Ingram and George Kittle, but it's a little bit deeper. And again, these ADPs are going to change as we get into real draft season right now at ESPN. So we'll see how that continues to change. But I'm with you. I love waiting. And if I want to wait on tight end, Dalton Kincaid, one of the guys that I'm absolutely grabbing in ESPN fantasy drafts. All right. That is your breakout column. Go check it out on ESPN.com if you want to read a little bit more from Liz Loza. We got another thing we're going to dive into, though, your drum beats. I know you also just had this come out on ESPN.com, Liz. Give me a background on what this article was about.
So DrumBeat Players are players where you can like hear something mounting, right? There's a tap, tap, a buzz, and it's maybe a whisper to begin with and then turns into an absolute crescendo, sometimes mid-season, sometimes end of the season, sometimes right before the season. But this is about fantasy managers keeping their ear to the ground, just listening for some consistency, some positive consistency and growth about a player. And I really like the concept, particularly over the summer. One of my favorite DrumBeat players has been Ramondre Stevenson. Like a couple of years ago, there was all of this chatter about like him being a pretty good pass catcher. And then wouldn't you know it, he bursts onto the scene. And so that's just kind of like, be mindful. I know we try to like parse coach speak, but if there is something building and it continues to build, pay attention.
Yeah. I think between the coach speak and the camp reports, which I want to be so excited about, but you also have to take with a massive grain of salt because everyone's positive at this time of year. We're trying to figure out, like you're saying, all right, so I'm hearing this hum on this player. How much of it is real? How much of it is team speak or coach speak or just trying to be positive about a player they have in their system? And how much do I need to say as a fantasy manager, maybe I need to start thinking about this guy a little bit differently than I was? So let's talk about that, Liz. We've got a handful of players we're going to dive into. You're going to lead it off with a pretty big quarterback that Field has also been talking about so far this year.
Yeah, so Anthony Richardson isn't maybe a DrumBeat player because everybody knows his name, especially after last year. But the chatter around him has been incessant, and it's pushing him up draft boards, which other managers are very triggered by, I have discovered.
Yes.
Like, yes, he left early in 3 of 4 starts last year, but he has a monster arm and elite rushing traits. 22.6% of his pass attempts went over 15 yards downfield last year, and 4 of his 7 total touchdowns came via his legs. We talked about cheat codes with Jayden Daniels. Anthony Richardson is like a cheat code of the MCU. Like, there is no way he is not an Avenger. He averaged over 18 fantasy points per game, the QB11, with 49% of those points coming via his legs. I just love the talent here. And that's not all. I also don't mind his situation. He's surrounded by capable playmakers. He's working behind a top 4 ranked offensive line. And his head coach knows a thing or two about getting the most out of a, quote, oft-injured QB with electric mobility.
Yeah, honestly.
Basically, where I come down here is like, nobody has ever won anything, fantasy or otherwise, by playing scared. So if you are nervous, get yourself some insurance. Jayden Daniels, Aaron Rodgers, Trevor Lawrence in the double-digit rounds. Fine, back him up, but don't play scared unless you like finishing 6th.
Hey, Liz, Loza, wow, I love that. That's exactly how you need to bring a take here. I'm with you on this. Why does it feel like people are triggered when we talk about Anthony Richardson being so high? It feels like we have to have a trigger warning when we mention him, because people are like, what? You have him as a top 5 quarterback? He only played 3 or 4 games last year. You can't do that. But it's like the eye test, Liz. Like, I get that he got hurt last year. Like, no one's saying that he didn't get hurt last year. But, like, this guy was literally built in a factory to be a video game Madden player and to do all the things that we want in fantasy football. An incredibly huge arm, legs that can win you a week, given all the upside that he has, like we mentioned with Jayden Daniels. I have no reason why you would not be in on Anthony Richardson this year, especially with the pass catchers they have around him. I am excited to see if Adonai Mitchell and him can create something really special in this offense. In spite of the fact that I love him and Michael Pittman, unlocking that deep arm, that big ball to A.D. Mitchell, I think would be very fun. So I'm with you. Anthony Richardson, a guy, in spite of the fact that he's maybe the biggest name on this list, there's still a lot of positivity towards him here in the beginning of the season. All right, another wide receiver. We're going to go from like the top of the stratosphere to quite a bit ways underneath it. Who's this next player you have?
Well, I mean, I couldn't write an article about DrumBeat Players and not highlight someone named Pop. So I wanted to talk about Demario Douglas. He ended up leading the Patriots in receiving yards and targets at the close of last year.
Yep.
Like, yeah, the receiving core was a mess. Okay, it's still kind of a mess. Nobody's denying that. But over that time, Douglas flashed quicks. He showed solid separation skills, reliable hands. He converted 49 of 54 catchable targets. He was a gift off of the waiver wire to people who were streaming down the back half and needed some flex options. He enters this season as like a lock at the slot position. I will admit right now he's dealing with a little bit of a hand issue. And if that becomes a bigger issue, then I would expect Javon Baker to compete for the slot role. But he's a rookie, and Douglas has proved that he belongs on the squad. He's also gotten incredible remarks and praise over practices and throughout the summer. Basically, he is a very low-risk investment with an overall ADP of 164 and could deliver top 50 wide receiver results in PPR-friendly formats. This is a flex guy, but again, all of the momentum, all of the buzz, all of the noise is nothing but positive, and he's getting a promotion.
Yeah. And you love that. You look at this wide receiving core, and that's kind of where I land with this. I like Pop Douglas based on what he did last year. He had 5 games with double-digit fantasy points, which if you grabbed him off the waiver wire and you need to throw him in your lineup, that's great. If you can get 10 or more fantasy points from a guy you added off of waivers to be able to help you in your fantasy lineup, I'm thrilled with that. But when I look at this receiving core, I know we've talked about Jalen Polk I understand that Kendrick Bourne could potentially come back. We hope that he will be back and healthy because he's a really good wide receiver. But there's a lot of question marks here. And you mentioned it. I mean, if Pop Douglas continues to be the guy that we saw last year and continues to build on that, we're looking for chemistry with new quarterback Drake May to figure out who's going to be the guy in this offense. I don't think it's just a given that all of a sudden they hand it to Jalen Polk, in spite of the fact that they like him and he was a second-round pick this year, that they want to be able to do well. But if you're telling me you can get a guy free, absolutely free, costs you nothing in Pop Douglas in the last round of your fantasy drafts, given what he could be in this, I think that it's at least worth monitoring based on what he could be and how open that wide receiver depth chart is. All right.
And I think every rookie quarterback needs a little bit of a safety valve. That's where Pop can shine.
Yep. All right. Speaking of safety valves, he's not a rookie quarterback, but Daniel Jones has not had 1,000-yard. Well, the Giants in general have not had a 1,000-yard wide receiver since 2018, when Odell Beckham Jr. was still with the team. So I want to talk about, and this one is a pretty high guy, but Malik Nabers. The drum beat on Malik Nabers, especially after coming out of camp practice with the Detroit Lions, has been huge. He was unbelievable, it sounds like, in these latest team practices. And if you look at what he did in college, the dude is unreal and has been. Excuse me. I am pulling up my sheet here. I'm so sorry. When you look at what he did last year, 120 receiving yards per game in 2023, right? He absolutely crushed it. Also had double-digit receiving touchdowns. And now he comes to an offense that, when I just mentioned, there's a big wide open space in that Patriots wide receiving core. It's the same thing in New York. He's going to come in and absolutely be the guy from day one. Jordan Renan tweeted out that over the last 2 days of practice, he had 18 different targets from Daniel Jones to Malik Nabers. Nabers caught 17 of them, including a number of highlight catches. He's a guy that is getting a ton of buzz, and the gap between him, the reason why I wanted to highlight him, the gap between him and the other rookie wide receiver that we love so much, Marvin Harrison Jr., is quite large this year. I wonder if that gap needs to shrink and if Nabers needs to be looked at as a better, potentially higher option in fantasy football. I think he's a guy we got to continue to monitor based on his skill set and the fact that this offense is going to run through him. How do you feel about Malik Nabers this year, Liz?
I absolutely love him. And really, I love the point you're making about him and the gap between he and Marvin Harrison Jr. That is an excellent point and not one I've heard anywhere else. Yes, we can, there are so many stats. Number 2 in deep catches, number 2 in missed tackles forced, 27 in 2023, number 1 in yards per route run, efficiency metrics. All of his college metrics are stunning, particularly from 2023. He is my wide receiver 24. Now, after you've said that about Marvin Harrison, I feel like maybe I need to move him up. You are affecting me in real time here because he's going to draw 120 looks. And even if Daniel Jones is Daniel Jonesing and he only converts 60 of those, or maybe 65% of those,
sure,
that's still a pretty good number of grabs. We know that he's solid, in terms of after the catch and what he can do. He has the 4th highest odds as rookie of the year behind Caleb Williams, Jayden Daniels, and Marvin Harrison. This is tempting. I think I'm going to have to move him up now. While I'm looking at the numbers and this is part of the conversation that I love and I wish more fantasy creators would have, or we would have more in the fantasy community, that it's if I believe X so strongly, and that is that Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to be a top 15, 12, 8 producer, then why am I lower on Nabers? Food for thought. I appreciate this. This is good. I'm going to move him up. Thank you, Daniel.
Yeah. Hey, this is part of the drum beat, Liz. Trying to hear what's going on in practice. All right, let's keep on moving. You got a couple more guys here. I mentioned Khalil Shakir earlier in the show. Why do you like him as a drum beat guy in this offense?
I'm going to be quick with this one. I mean, Shakir has been a long-time dynasty darling since he was drafted. And over the past 2 years, he's really served as the 4th or 5th receiving option for Josh Allen. But we saw what he could do once Gabriel Davis exited during the playoffs last year. And in that time, he scored a touchdown in each of those playoff games. His numbers jumped. He happens to also be heading into this year. You know, we've talked about the targets vacated. So, yes, he's in line for a promotion. But beyond that, he also happens to be the only wide receiver on the Bills' current roster that Josh Allen has actually targeted in his career. So, there's that. The Curtis Samuel situation, because these are both, he's going to man the slot. Shakir will. The Curtis Samuel situation is a little bit, might cap his upside a little bit, since Samuel and Joe Brady obviously have history from their time in Carolina together. So I don't love that, but I think the rapport with Allen, the knowledge of the system, he's now heading into his third year. We like that idea of the third year breakout. I think he's probably going to flirt with 90 targets. And basically in the 14th round, do you want a piece of the Bills offense? Do you want a piece of one of Josh Allen's known pass catchers? Sure, I do. If I can't get Kincaid, then let me wait and at least get a piece of this offense via Shakir really late.
I'm with you on that. Especially if I don't have anything from an offense like this that is supposed to be as good as the Bills are going to be, it's a really low investment in an offense that could, again, boom like we expect them to.
Yeah.
The big question mark for me on Shakir and Curtis Samuel is the idea that they both run the slot. They were both top 15 in slot fantasy points last season, which means someone's going to have to figure out where they're going to play or how they're going to rotate time. But I love Khalil Shakir. I'm with you. He feels like a preseason darling and someone that we have looked at. I'm curious, too, if he's going to return any kicks. I want to know what's going to happen with this new kick rule in the NFL. Mike hasn't really done a lot with projections yet, but in watching it, especially because I have tried to dive deep in what it can do, I just want to know how it's going to potentially impact fantasy football. Khalil Shakir, thanks to the Scott Fishbowl League, I started thinking about returners a little bit more than I would in regular ESPN Fantasy League. So just a thought, and a big shout out to Scott Fish. We love you, buddy. All right. We've got another person to talk about, Blake Corum. Liz, tell me why there's a drum beat around Blake Corum and why we need to listen to it, given the fact that Kyren Williams is the guy in that offense.
Blake the Great, man. He may not have prototypical size, but he proved at Michigan that he can carry all the loads in all of the ways. The volume was obviously monstrous while he was in Ann Arbor. His touchdown rate was bananas, 27 rushing touchdowns in 2023, which was the most in FBS history since 2017. He also graded out as a proficient pass catcher, so I like the versatility there. He presents as a high-volume player. Now, you mentioned his landing spot in Los Angeles, a little bit weird, because Kyren Williams was such a star last year, except for the times he wasn't, like his rookie year when his foot got in the way, and for 5 games last year when he was dealing with other lower extremity issues. And he's already missed a significant portion of OTAs dealing with another foot issue. The fact that the Rams drafted Blake Corum in the 3rd round indicates or suggests maybe to me that they are also a little bit worried about Williams and want some insurance. And Corum is a wonderful add to a Sean McVay offense, one that favors a primary ball carrier. So will he start the season hot? Probably not. But can you stash him and wait? Or if Williams eventually goes down, use him as trade bait for the manager who rostered Williams and is now pretty desperate? Yeah, I don't know why you wouldn't add him. I don't see a world in which Williams does not miss time and Corum can step right into that role.
Yeah. Does it feel like this is a situation? We had a joke last year. Do you know who loves Kyren Williams?
Stephania Bell.
It doesn't matter. Because the head coach of the Los Angeles Rams loved Kyren Williams. And so when you talk about him, is there a chance that, like you had said, this could be a situation where you might have a handful of weeks without huge production from Blake Corum until it happens, until you see Kyren Williams maybe miss some time? I'm not sure how much they're going to be splitting time, but what happens when he finally gets that chance and we get to see him in this actual Rams offense? I'm very interested to see how it's going to work. Yeah.
That's it. I'm fading Kyren Williams. I have him ranked pretty high, obviously, but in my personal drafting, give me Isaiah Pacheco over Williams, and I will wait and scoop Corum a little bit later, because what you said is 100% correct. Corum will be the guy when he's inevitably the guy, but it's going to happen. I just don't know exactly when. And also, Sean McVay loves his running backs. We talked about him and Cam Akers being each other's lobsters, right? He's got a new lobster, even though that's not the way it's supposed to work.
That's fair.
And it's Kieran Williams. Corum can be his lobster in the future. His lobster, his penguin, his goose. I don't know any of those other
why did we
animals
pick
that
those
mate
animals?
for life.
Yeah, is there a reason why we chose lobsters? I like it.
Because they're supposed to mate for life.
Oh, that's so sweet.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. I just learned.
Well, enjoy your lobster roll next time you eat one.
Wow, Liz, please don't do that to me. Jeez. All right, I'm going to talk really quickly about a player. We only got a few players left, closing up the show. How about Jayden McMillan? This is a guy that in this Bucs offense has been getting a ton of buzz. Coming out of the University of Washington, Ryan Grubb was his OC there. Same offense as Rome Odunze, now goes to Tampa Bay to play behind Mike Evans and Chris Godwin in a situation where I think they need a third wide receiver. I know that Trey Palmer is there, but if you see, Jenna Lane actually tweeted out yesterday that you'll see on their depth chart, Trey Palmer is listed third. She made it very clear that's going to change. Jayden McMillan is going to be one of the guys in this offense. They're going to find ways to be able to use him. And I look at just so many of these camp reports. Levante David saying great things about what he is doing in camp. You're hearing all the things. You're seeing all of these highlights on Twitter of him making these great catches, having chemistry and working with Baker Mayfield. Given what this Bucs wide receiving core is, if anything were to happen to any of those other top two wide receivers, I think Jayden McMillan not only would be able to slot into a potential flex option for you in fantasy, but I think there's a chance as we get through this season, Liz Loza, that in a 3 wide receiver set, that he can become a guy in this offense that fantasy managers might be able to use. There wasn't a third pass catcher, really, in Tampa Bay last year. Cade Otton was on the field a ton. I think he was on the field a metric buttload is what we would describe it. But he just doesn't catch passes. He's not a guy in fantasy that's getting a lot of volume. So they need a guy that can become the number 3. And like I said, anything happens to those other 2 wide receivers, I think McMillan is in a really nice spot given all the buzz that we've heard about him so far this year. Any thoughts on Jayden McMillan?
You absolutely nailed the definition of a drum beat with this one. Chef's kiss, no notes, you ate, let's move forward.
Love it. Jaleel McLaughlin at running back. I want this one to happen too, Liz. Tell me about the drumbeat around this running back in Denver.
Listen, there weren't a lot of good things that went on in Denver last year, but at least McLaughlin added some energy to the situation. He recorded 5.3 yards per touch. That was the RB3. And he managed a top 6 juke rate of over 25% in his rookie year. He was also, and this I think is the most important piece, he emerged as a resource in the passing game. He converted 31 of 36 looks. Look, if you look at his size, he's not going to be an every down option, but his OC is Joe Lombardi. Now, let's remember that Joe Lombardi coached players like, Alvin Kamara and Austin Eckler. So this is not a coach who cares about draft pedigree, for the record, nor does he particularly care about size. He cares about the pass-catching ability of his players, and McLaughlin has that. I mean, he was undrafted out of Youngstown, right? So, there's some, Austin Eckler-type vibes here. And I think as long as McLaughlin can catch and move and all of these question marks surround the rest of the Broncos' backfield, he could emerge under Lombardi as a solid flex option in PPR-friendly formats.
I mean, you kind of mentioned it, and I don't want to say this is the same thing as the Raiders, but do we expect the Broncos to be super good? I mean, I would assume that they are probably trailing, right? And when you think about that,
correct.
All right, well, let me look at the pass-catching running backs that maybe can give me some really good value as a pass-catching back, maybe even in garbage time. Garbage time doesn't make a difference to fantasy managers. Blake Bortles proved that to us like a decade ago, that you can Bortle your way to fantasy relevance, right? So if this happens, the question to me is Javonte Williams being able to finally be healthy. Last year, coming back from injury, he didn't look like his former self. And I think he still needed some time to be able to get back. Stefania talks about all the time. The difference between return to play and return to performance. And for Javonte Williams, figuring out who is he going to be in this offense and how much of an opportunity will that afford to Jaleel McLaughlin. But I love, especially with where he's being drafted, which is he's not. He is absolutely free. He's a guy you can look at on waivers. He's a guy that you can absolutely go out, and there might be something more here given how bad this team might be. Some of those dump-off plays to those running backs can absolutely deliver flex value for you. So I'm with you. I like this call, and someone we at least need to keep an eye on through the rest of the offseason. Love that, Liz. All right. You want to stick in the AFC West for the last one?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right.
Let's talk about Brock Bowers then. Listen, I know that rookie tight ends can be tough for redraft, and I'm not expecting Bowers to explode onto the scene, but I do think he can put up numbers similarly to what we saw out of Dalton Kincaid last year. Bowers' talent is generational. That is the note, right? He was unanimously considered the most talented player at the position and perhaps the second most polished offensive player overall in last April's draft. The Raiders got him at 13th overall, which might have been a little bit low, frankly. They couldn't resist. And we know that we've already talked about how much this team is going to want to run the ball, and they're going to throw out a lot of 2 tight end sets. And yes, Michael Mayer is a formidable talent, but like we saw with Dawson Knox last year, I think Bowers' pass catching ability will eventually surpass Mayer. And tiebreaker goes to talent. I think he's going to probably flirt with some numbers down the stretch. He's not somebody that you're going to want to grab early. He's not going to be your tight end 1 overall immediately. But if we're talking drum beats, listen close, because this kid's going to be a star.
Another situation where a team, like we talked about, if the Raiders are going to be down a lot, they're probably going to have to pass the ball a lot. Could be a situation where he can get some nice junk time as well. It's really interesting to me because the Raiders didn't need him. You mentioned that he fell to 13th in the draft. They didn't need Brock Bowers. They had just used a second-round pick on Michael Mayer, a guy that they like a lot. So the fact that they doubled up on the tight end position, and then I'm trying to read through a lot of these camp reports. Are we going to run a lot of 12 personnel? How many 2 tight end sets are we going to have in this offense? And are you actually lining Brock Bowers up at tight end? Or is Michael Mayer that guy? And Bowers is really like more of just a big wide receiver. And playing that kind of Travis Kelce role, right? That's more of what he does when he's that kind of guy.
It's just the gutsy of it all because he's such like an old school guy and he wants his tight ends to earn their pass catching opportunities via run blocking reps, right? So and obviously I dealt with him in Chicago. I mean, I didn't personally deal with him, but my soul dealt with him in Chicago last year, right? So I don't love that, but I also feel like, I don't know, if you're an OC and you just got canned and you have this generational talent, maybe you're fine, I give up. Just go catch the ball, kid.
Yeah, I don't need to make you run block. If you're really good at this other thing, and that's why we drafted you with the 13th overall in the NFL draft, let's just let you do the thing that you're really good at. Because, by the way, our team needs production. And no offense to run blocking, but as much as that's going to be great, you mentioned it earlier, even when I talked about Zamir White. There's a big chance they're just stacking boxes left and right against either Aiden O'Connell or Gardner Minshew. Go ahead and beat us with your quarterback. I dare you. That's what defenses are probably going to be saying to Las Vegas. So in that situation, yes, please don't, please, let's just say this now. Please do not make Brock Bowers a run-blocking tight end like we had to see with Kyle Pitts each of the last 2 years. Don't Kyle Pitts him. Just let him go out there and be the guy that he is. Please.
Learn from others' mistakes,
yes.
Luke. Come on.
That's it. All right. Liz Loza, thank you so much. This has been so fun to be able to hang out, do this show with you. Go and check out Liz's articles. They are available on ESPN.com. And if you want more Liz Loza, August 15th at Banners in Boston. 5 p.m. doors, 6 p.m. we're doing the show. All of us are going to be there hanging out. It's going to be a ton of fun. Liz, I cannot wait to see you in person at that live show. We love you. Don't forget to love each other. Be kind to yourself. And we will see you guys tomorrow. Peace.